It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
This is Freeman Michaels here today with a guest co-host. Katherine Woodward Thomas is joining me in place of Barnett Bain, who is out of town. Katherine, for those of you who don't know, though you've got to know Katherine at this point, she is the best-selling author of Calling in the One. She is also the co-creator and co-leader of the Feminine Power Transformational Courses for Women. She is the creator of the Conscious Uncoupling program, which we've featured here on this show in the past, and she is an incredible, incredible friend of the show. Katherine, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
It's always so much fun to have you. So we're going to talk a little bit about my work today.
Yay, how exciting.
Yay. So for those of you who know that I wrote the book, Wait, Release, A Liberating Journey, which is really a bit of my own personal experience. It's the process I developed in part because as I looked out in the world, there weren't a lot of programs that were what I needed. It wasn't okay for me. And here's a bit of the story. I was in the middle of my business coming apart, which Katherine, of course, you know about, which happened right around 2007, 2008 was when it was all sort of unraveling. And I ended up in the hospital with chest pains. And it was dramatic. Like whatever side of your body goes numb, all the things that are part of a heart attack were what the symptoms I had. Wow. And my wife, who was a nurse, she's now a sonographer, she does ultrasounds, but at one point she was a nurse, and she immediately went, we got to get you to the hospital right now. And, you know, in the car, off to the hospital, they all took it serious. I was having a heart attack as far as everyone was concerned. I wasn't having a heart attack, which is interesting. But what the doctor said to me is, look, you're not having a heart attack now, but the level of stress you're under and the condition of your body. I was 275, 280 pounds. I was really big.
Wow.
Crazy I even got that big. It's a little shocking for me to think about it. And he said, you're going to have to go on a diet. And I remember just like sort of breaking out in a sweat, like, oh God, another diet. Because I was a soap opera star and I dieted for, I don't know, decades. I was a dieter for years. And so the idea of another diet was not, I mean, I you know, for me, it was really dramatic. So I knew I had to do something different. And I went about finding various pieces. Janine Roth's work, at that time she hadn't written Women, Food, and God, but she had written Emotional Eating. Mm-hmm. And I got both the book and the CDs. I listened to all of it, very helpful. But other things as well. Other people's work came in, and I was really able to very consciously craft for myself a context for doing some of the deep work at looking at, it wasn't about the physical weight. I mean, it wasn't the way it manifested, but it was about deeper held beliefs, agreements, ways in which I was holding energetically, because that's what the weight was, other pieces that I needed to look at. And through a process of about less than a year, I released probably 70 or 80 pounds.
Wow. Now, did you go on a particular food plan in addition to that, or you were?
I went on several. Okay. So, you know, I was picking and choosing, and big pieces of it were metabolism, that I made choices that had to do with fueling. But what was I fueling? See, before I sort of broke down, as it were, because we know this, breakdown often precedes a breakthrough. Like something has to come apart for us to really look at our lives and go, wow, how did I get here? And with the weight, really. And there's so many threads. I mean, I wrote a 250-page book about it, including my process and a process that other people could follow as well. So it's hard to say in a sentence. Just suffice to say that I needed to make choices that were moving me into something I wanted. I had to be feeding something that was self-honoring and self-expressive and was going somewhere. Much of what I was feeding was not constructive, right? I was repressing feelings, emotions, fear, doing a lot of stuffing and shoveling, and those kinds of pieces of the puzzle, which was really not how I wanted to live my life.
So I'm just fascinated that you were able to do this, and I'm wondering about like the addictive kind of component to it, because I know food is for so many a real addictive experience.
Yeah.
And do you feel that you have to, like in OA, for instance, you have to arrest the addiction and just go on a particular food plan, and then you have to be very rigid about that, and then you're like looking at your feelings and identifying your feelings that are underneath the eating? Or
So, no.
Okay.
There's some really important distinctions.
Okay.
The patterns, when they're, because there is an element of the neurochemical, these neural pathways where these are habitualized behaviors, and they are to cope with deeper held things. But there is this element of interrupting the pattern, and that's important. It's very important we have pattern interruption processes. So we actually recognize this is habitualized behavior, and there's a way of interrupting it by becoming aware of what it is from a place of compassion. Compassion is sort of rule number one, that, I call it the conscious compassionate observer.
Right.
We have to be able to look at our experience with compassion, which ultimately dimensionalizes it. When we're judging, we're locking it in a very narrow frame of reference. We're crunching it down to good or bad or right or wrong, right? It's like on or off. It's two-dimensional versus this way of seeing it with layers and moving in there with compassion and saying, wow, okay, there's a part of me that learned to cope. And there's a part of me that's heavily addicted to, let's say, sugar, for example. How do I want to be with that part of myself? And then the practice has to be a way of meeting some of the needs that are underneath the behavior. So again, if it's coping, and it's funny because I can even tell you the foods. All right, when I'm stressed out, I like salty and crunchy. That's what I go for. That's the kind of cravings I have. When I'm feeling sad or I'm having emotional stuff come up, I want sweet. I like ice cream. I want creamy. I want chocolate. And so what's happened actually is I become aware as I'm running for the cupboard what's coming up for me in what I'm looking for. So then I have to go into what's my plan to meet those needs in self-honoring ways. And there's a plan, there's an interruption, and there's something to do. There's somewhere to go with it, right?
Wow.
Because you have to have somewhere to go.
So the question you're asking yourself, so you notice that you want to go to the freezer and get some ice cream.
Yeah.
And what's the question you're asking yourself?
So it's that inquiry process of, wow, what's coming up for me? What emotions are coming up for me that need to be soothed? And those emotions I usually do, bathing is a really big one for me. I have bathing practices where I go run a bath. I love warm tea. Warm stuff really helps me.
You smell so good.
That's right. I do. I bathe every day. I bathe, and I sometimes bathe a couple times a day because it's a self-soothing practice.
Okay.
And so ritualized practices repeated. Go ahead.
Food. I mean, food is, I think, self-soothing.
It is.
It's missing mother.
Yeah. And here's the thing. You can self-soothe with food. You have to do it consciously. All right. So there are certain foods that I consciously associate with something. I'll admit to one. So I grew up in the traditional Irish Catholic family where you have a cocktail after work. And even though in my adult life, sometimes I did that, sometimes I didn't. I still remember Grandma and Grandpa with the clinking glasses, the ice cubes, the clinking glasses, the squeeze of lime for the gin and tonic. So I don't have gin and tonics. I don't do cocktail hour. But what I do is I have seltzer water with a squeeze of lime in a cocktail glass with the clinking. And for me, this is the associative, conscious associative thing is that is my way of taking the edge off, is what my grandpa used to always say. I'm taking the edge off. So now I take the edge off, but instead of gin and tonic, I have just soda water. And it has the same quality.
Wow.
But it's the quality. So what I'm aware of is that so much of my work is quality driven. It's not the expression, it's the quality that's underneath the expression. And then I can find a multitude of different expressions to match up with the quality I'm going for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
So, look, the truth is when we talk about patterns, there has to be a way of interrupting it. There has to be a way of replacing it. And then we want to have a self-care process. We want to have practices that are not something we do once in a while. We do them every single day. So I walk every morning. And the walking is so many things for me. It's my way. It's my walking meditation. And then I have a certain visualization. I plug into my earphones and I listen to it on the walk. So I can use the walk as various things, right? I'll even have meetings on my walk. Barnett, my partner, who's not here today, but we'll talk often and check in. And I'll put on my headset and I'll go walk the 40-minute walk in the neighborhood. And we do our meeting while I'm walking.
Wow.
Yeah, and my business manager, when he used to actually come in the office, he and I would do walks. We do all of our meetings as walks. So all of these things are consciously created. And when we begin to consciously ritualize practices around eating, in this program, in fact, I've asked Deidre Hayde to do some ritualized practices. I had dinner with her, and she's awesome. Like, she lights candles, and she, no worries, she lights candles. You just kicked me, Katherine.
Must be some deep-seated hostility.
That's right. And she says prayers, and I said, wow, I want a more ritualized practice for my eating that makes it more sacred. Because again, it's a meaning that we apply to something.
Wow.
Right, versus there's no inherent meaning. We make it meaningful. So
yeah. So how is your relationship with food now?
It's interesting. So many things about my relationship with food haven't changed, but I've changed in relationship to those parts of me. So the parts of me that run for the cupboard, it's, in the last show we did together, we talked about the 3-minute rule with my wife. I have the same 3-minute rule. So I can get halfway through a bag of Cheetos. No, not halfway, but I can get into them before I realize what I'm doing. And then I can really compassionately go, wow, and immediately start having compassion for the part of me that's getting expressed in the ice cream or the whatever, It's a challenge. It's not something that you move, there's no fix it. It's moving into a deeper relationship. And when I fall off my practices and I fall into old patterns, the way it's been described, I've described it, and I've actually talked to some neuroscientists, because through this show I've gotten to know some folks, and we were talking about these neural pathways. And so one of the ways it's been described is it's like creating a new road, but it doesn't necessarily obliterate the old road, because that's like a default setting. And over many years, those things actually you can fall into them very easily. The idea is to run them parallel. So when you recognize you're on that old road, you go, wow, I'm on the old road, but you have somewhere to go with it. You have this new road. You have these new practices. So you have a place to put it. So more often than not, I'm in the new practices, but it doesn't obliterate the old pattern behaviors. And I can fall into those in a heartbeat.
And just as I get to know you more and more, Freeman, the hunger that I think was getting, expressed for physical food is really such a deep soul hunger for engagement, for life, for participation, for creativity. You're a very deep soul, and I think a lot of us don't have places to put that hunger. We haven't created structures of how to manage that level of thirst for life. And so, I think, just what you're talking about, this new relationship with food is almost going to demand that you develop and that you create these avenues for self-expression and participation.
Yes.
Your contribution is so delightful and gorgeous and so unique, really. I've never met anyone like you.
Oh, bless you. One of the things that you talk about, Katherine, that I really love, and we've talked about on this show, which relates to exactly what you're saying. First of all, what you just said is incredibly wise. That's absolutely right on. It has to do with the notion of capacity. And there are these places in my life where, based on the limitations of my my family of origin and so forth and so on, and what happened to me in life, where I pulled back on certain, sort of parts of me, I pulled back, and that was the best way I could, within my framework, express myself. So we've talked about this in relationship with my wife, levels of intimacy. There's a place where I kind of hit my own wall, as it were, and I go, ooh, beyond that, that's dangerous. And I know that. And my job is to move into relationship with that edge. That's what the show is about, the edge of possibility. Where is it that we restrict ourselves, and can we get to that edge and dwell on that with a certain amount of the discomfort, where we can peer over, and bit by bit what we're doing is expanding capacity. So one of the interesting things is, and you know this about me, I love food more. I make these over the weekends. I make these great concoctions, and they're healthier than they used to be, but I love food more. So the goal is actually to move into a deeper, more rich relationship with flavors and with tastes. And so it's actually the opposite, because I had so many years where I had this sort of love-hate. I made food the enemy. And I love food. So that is not going to be a helpful way for me to approach this. Then I'm in the deprivation game, which ultimately leads to a binge. We know that from Janine Ross' work. Clearly. You can't do that. So it's a different way of relating. And I love food more now than I ever have. Absolutely. And that's the capacity I want to grow. See, there again, we're into paradox. where it's like we think, oh, I need to not care about food. No, care more deeply about it so our relationship with food changes.
Yeah.
And the same is true with our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
How much am I willing to love this body of mine? I've been so disconnected from it so often in my life that reconnecting with it is it's a capacity, it's a commitment, and it can be work sometimes.
Right. It's where your attention is.
Yeah.
So your attention isn't like dissociating out there.
That's right.
Your attention is here, connected to your breath and maybe the sensations in your body. And
well, in all those ways that we slip into those unconscious patterns, when we're aware of that, it's an opportunity to go, wow, I want to reconnect with my body. I want to have a deeper, more profound relationship with food. And look, we brought up intimacy before, and I'll say a little piece about this. Carrying extra weight can be a form of protection.
Absolutely.
And so unconsciously, a lot of folks, and me in periods of my life, have put on extra weight as a way of fending off unwanted attention, or, I don't know, not knowing how to deal with going deeper with a partner, feeling like, oh, maybe I'm better if I just pull back a little and create some distance and some padding for myself, hide a little bit in this fat suit that I'm wearing. I did that, and I know a lot of folks do that, and it can, I didn't have, well, I got to be careful with this one because there are lots of layers in my experience that can be called things like abuse, and I want to kind of peel that away and get underneath it. But let's just, for blanket sake, say a lot of folks have experienced abuse in their lives, and the reaction of that, the interpretation from that is, I've got to hide. I don't want this ever to happen. So the best way I know how is to put on extra weight.
Right. Right. So, and I think we're not collectively thinking inside of development, so that this is an issue for so many women, actually, about wanting to dim down their radiance.
And men. And men. It's a huge lie to think that it's not men too. I mean, I know you know that, but yeah. Right. But you're speaking from a woman's perspective.
Well,
so.
I mean, we talk about this with women, because we're, are teaching feminine power. We're all about feminine radiance too, is really expressing ourselves fully from a very authentic center. And one of the things we find is that women will very often just dim down, gain weight, hide, because they don't have good boundaries. They can't say no to men who might want something from them. Yeah. So, and we just say, well, look, this is costing your life, and all that needs to happen is you need to just learn how to connect with what it is that you want and what it is that you don't want, and learn how to speak it clearly.
So this
like
is a whole part of my process.
Right?
Is are you able to ask for what you want? Are you able to yourself to say, what is it I really want? And this whole thing about determining wants and needs and getting our needs clear and getting our wants clear, it's a huge part of the process. It's a chapter in the book, but it's a big part of the work that I do with folks.
It really seems to be critical,
huge.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And I love that you're talking about that. Like, what do I really want?
Yeah.
And then how do I ask for what I desire from other people? Or how do I set boundaries? How do I tell them the truth?
Yeah. And what am I risking? That piece of the self we create, which in large part is out of defense. It's this adaptive, personality and these kind of characters we play in our lives, is that when we can get underneath it and we can love those parts of us. One of my character aspects, I wet my bed till I was 12. And to be 12 and still wet your bed is really challenging because you're starting to like girls. And I spent hours fantasizing about what kind of girl would marry a bedwetter. Like when you're 12, you don't realize it's going to end. Like you don't realize that this will one day be the past. It's real. And the crazy part is, even though after that, I had an interesting dream that's actually an extension of that I still can sometimes have. And I won't go into that, but I'm just saying that deep feeling of being unlovable, or that what will it take to love me, and if they really knew me they wouldn't like me, and how that got carried forward. So some of the character aspects that come up in me, there's too much to talk about in the time. We're running out of time. Here's what I want to say, is that it's the deeper look at these pieces of our lives, how we want to relate to those parts of us, and how we want to relate to food, and how we want to relate to our body. And if we start to actually establish that and then work through all these bits and pieces, and there are a lot. I'm not going to say this is simple. Well, parts of it are simple. It's not easy. parts of it, once we get it, we go, oh yeah, of course. But then the work is to get in there and move around and say, what does it feel like to be me in the world, and what do I want to put out? And that's the challenge. So the relationship with the release part, what we're releasing is ideas about who we're supposed to be, and what we're getting to know is ourselves on a more deep and more profound level.
It's beautiful, and you're such a good advertisement for your work. I'm so glad that we're videotaping you so we can see how gorgeous you are.
Oh, bless you. For those of you who tuned in, I appreciate it, and I if you enjoyed this, please send it out, and keep coming back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.